Jon.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here, and especially for the topic today. We're going to talk about, and we're probably going to do a series on cognitive biases because I find them fascinating, and they play a huge role in how we perceive other people. Therefore, they play a really big role in what we experience in our relationship. I'm going to ask for a little audience participation today. I want you guys chewing on this question. And I want you to put answers to this question in the chat. So not the Q&A, but in the chat, because at the very end here, I'm going to draw on some of these answers we give as a group. And the question is, what are some of the reasons why people behave badly? And there's one response or a category of responses you can't give. So we're going to rule out that people are stupid, and we're going to rule out that people are bad. So outside of stupidity and badness or evilness, what are the reasons why people behave badly? If you could just be thinking about that and put your responses in the chat, we're going to come to this at the end of my little section here. We're going to talk today about motive attribution asymmetry. This is a cognitive bias, which means that we are usually, well, what it means simply is the story you make up about why people do something or are the way that they are is probably wrong. In fact, most of the time, like near 100% of the time, it will be wrong. And your brain is set up to get it wrong. So what motive attribution asymmetry means is that to other people's actions that we don't agree with or don't understand, we tend to ascribe evil motives to. To our own actions, we tend to ascribe loving motives to. So, for example, you talk to anybody on the right side or the left side of the political divide in the country, and it probably won't take long before you see somebody or hear somebody say, the people on the other side do what they do because they hate America or they hate whatever country. And me and the people who think like me, we really love our country, and that's why we do what we do. That's a really kind of, I think, prominent example of this motive attribution asymmetry. It divides the world up into two camps. There's good and evil, and it just so happens that the majority of the time, the vast majority of the time, we put ourselves in the good camp, and by default, we put everybody else or the people who don't think like us, or the people who don't behave in ways that make sense to us, we put them in the evil camp. So I think this has direct application to the couples that I work with. On the addict side of the equation, it's not uncommon that I'll have a guy come to my office and he presents as especially when he talks about his relationship, he presents as a hurt little boy who's had a lot of injustice done to him. And he may say something like, I just don't understand why my spouse is so mean or why they want me to hurt in this way. There's an example of that motive attribution asymmetry. My spouse is treating me poorly because they're bad or because, they don't know any better. They want to hurt me. That's why this is so difficult. When my spouse holds a boundary, or, just the other week I was working with a couple where the addicted partner in the coupleship said, she's so mean and unfair when she tells me I'm in cycle and I insist that I'm not. So there's an example from addicts, the way I see it. A lot of times the addicts that I work with, they'll assume rejection and misunderstanding rather than risk vulnerability and intimacy. This is at the core of the intimacy disorder that really pervades sex and pornography addiction. I'm better off keeping myself closed off. I can't tolerate being open with people. So we're always looking for reasons to justify our behavior, because staying the way that we are is a lot easier than changing the way that we are, how we feel, how we think. So this is a really common justification. I'm just not with someone who's safe. My partner really doesn't want a safe relationship. I do. They can't handle our differences. For partners that I work with, a lot of partners that I work with, when they first discover or disclose to that there's a sex or a pornography addiction, they read all the information they can get about addiction, which I think overall is a positive step. Educate yourself about the problem that you're facing. I don't think that all material about sex addiction is created equal, however. So a lot of partners, I'm thinking about one in particularly, where when we get into, couples work, and I'll, encourage her spouse to open up and, talk about what's going on with him, she'll say, that just surprises me to hear that, because in this book I read that addicts always XYZ, and in this book I read that addicts always XYZ. She probably emails me about every other week and says, all right, there's a contradiction in what you're telling me and what I'm reading here. What's true? So again, in the spirit of I need to know what I'm up against, partners will do a lot of reading. And another way that this mode of attribution asymmetry shows up is we paint large groups of people with a broad brush. There are certainly a lot of addicts out there, and there are certainly examples of people who struggle with sex and porn addiction who are more narcissistic. There are examples of people who are abusive. And those examples tend to get talked about in books because they're extreme examples, and that's, what engages people, or it illustrates, the worst of what's possible. So another way that we do that unfairly or asymmetrically, attributing motives to others, is we paint with a broad brush. You're an addict, so you must think this way and you must feel this way. It can get us in a trap of overgeneralizing, and it contributes to a cascade of events I see between partners and addicts, where the chasm of misunderstanding just continues to grow. We're really fundamentally in different camps. And again, the way that our brains are wired, when somebody is different than us, wants different things than us, behaves differently than us, we tend to see them as bad and ourselves as noble and good. So again, the chasm continues to widen. The only remedy for this is to get up close, to drop all labels, to drop all preconceived notions, and to get up close with the person that you're hoping to bridge a gap with, or that you're wanting to see if it's possible to bridge a gap with. And by up close, I mean not turning on trust, not turning on affection, but slowing down the part of us that's going to see threat in everything, because that's what we do when we're in survival mode. Slowing down that part of us and allowing some other parts of us to come forward. I have 3 suggestions for how we can remedy this, or at least temper this cognitive bias. Number 1 is commit to suspend judgment and to stay curious. Now, by that, I don't mean see if you can find good reasons why your spouse might be abusive towards you, or to find good reasons why their gaslighting is okay. That's not what suspending judgment means. Suspending judgment simply means I'm going to take the value-laden language out of this. My partner does XYZ, so they are bad or good. If you're going to suspend judgment, you're just focusing on behavior. I'm noticing that when my partner and I have conversations that are stressful, my partner tends to strike out. My partner tends to insult me more often when we have conversations that are stressful. That's an example of suspending judgment and staying curious. I'm just looking at the behavior. I'm gathering the information. The second is to catch yourself in the stories that you tell yourself. Again, know that a high percentage of the time, like I'm confident in saying over 95% of the time, the story you're telling yourself is wrong. That doesn't mean that it's all the way wrong. It just means it's probably, there's a high probability that it's not complete, and there's factors that you haven't considered because you can't see. So when you catch yourself in the stories you tell yourself, at a minimum, you can remind yourself that this is just a theory at best. And until I get more information, or until I, just like we do in science, when we have a theory, we go test it. We're actually trying to prove ourselves wrong. That's how thorough investigation works. Ideally, so at best, we remind ourselves this is just a theory, and I'm still gathering information to see if that theory could be wrong. ideally, we would talk to our partner and others to contextualize our perception. So I totally get that in addiction, you may not be able to rely on your partner to be a reliable source of information for what's going on inside of them and others, and you. We know that gaslighting can be a big part of that. We know that inability, that fear of being vulnerable can be a big part of that. So that's why I put the others in there. When you have others in your support circle who have maybe been down this road before you and maybe know a little more of the context, the point is, when we check out our story with another person who really can be a fair witness, I think we're challenged to kind of break out of our own biases, break out of our own perceptions that may be based a lot in fear, and to get a little more up close. What else could this be about? And that's the third question, is challenge yourself to ask that question. Like I asked at the very beginning, we got lots of good responses, so thank you. Are there other reasons why my partner might be behaving this way? If I know that I have a bias, that my brain is biased towards, or my brain has a tendency to see people who don't behave in ways that I understand or even ways that are hurtful to me as evil, are there other ways? Here's what you guys came up with. So some people behave badly because it's the coping mechanism that they know. Some people behave badly because they can. My 8-year-old is a prime example of this. There's like 3 behaviors I'm really working with him on right now to stay on top of and make sure that he doesn't do. The other night he did one, and he got the consequence. And later on we were talking about it, and I said, why did you do that? And he said, well, you really can't stop me from doing it. And I said, you're right. I can't stop you from doing that. And he said, why would I not do something that I can? I said, yeah, that's a reason to do something. What I want you to think about is the impact it has on other people. So maybe while you can do it, it may not be something that you always want to do, but yeah, people do things just because they can. Subconscious beliefs. This is another reason why I love looking at cognitive bias, because we can actually research this stuff. We can actually see this stuff play out commonly. And I love to see what happens with somebody when you put this deeply held belief that they've never examined up against this. Did you know that your brain is prone to believe that way? You think you're making a choice here, you actually may not be. Subconscious belief, I think, plays a huge role in why we do what we do. Again, I don't think that many people see themselves as villains. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. We may not recognize all the reasons. It may not be as simple as that. I may not be doing this because I think it's right. I may think this is right because I'm doing it. So subconscious beliefs play a big role. Fear, I think, is a huge reason why people behave badly. For me, that's the number one thing I look for when I'm working with couples and someone is doing something that's hurtful to their partner. I'd say 9 times out of 10, the person who's doing the offending behavior, 9 times out of 10, they're driven by fear in doing it. Fear is an emotion that, unlike just about any other emotion, it has the potential to hijack the brain. So that's a really good one to look for. Childhood trauma, or they weren't taught how to treat others positively. I think that's another reason why people do things that are hurtful. Another person said subconsciousness or programming. Maybe programming is a better word. Yeah, again, we kind of have our set of coping, and despite how conscientious you may be, you didn't arrive at your first set of coping because you thought it out. You arrived at it because you kind of cobbled together what was taught you and what was shown you. And a lot of times we're not shown what's best in general. I'd say 100% of the times we're not shown what's best for our partner until we're with our partner and our partner starts showing us what's best for them. Shame, low self-esteem, fear of abandonment, doing what they know. Again, some things we've talked about. Shame, I think, is a big reason. Neurologically, the experience of shame, it's a turning inward. If you look at how your body does it biologically, it's meant to be a temporary turning inward, a momentary point of consideration, a momentary point of inspection, because shame is an emotion that comes up socially. When I do something that hurts the social fabric around me, I'll feel shame. But we don't experience shame as that. We tend to turn inward and stay inward on that. And when we're inwardly turned, of course, our behavior is going to hurt other people because we're not considering beyond ourselves. Somebody said, yes, my sexually addicted spouse believes that I am the evil one. He has even involved our daughter-in-law in this belief and found it. And I found out quite by accident what he's been saying in secret to her. Yeah, so this proves my point here. This happens all the time. Somebody said people behave badly because they're not connected with their emotions. If your body and your brain are ever in a fight, your body will always win. So if you ignore what's going on in your body or can't tune in with it, the motives or the energy that is behind most of your action, it will come from the emotions that you're not connected to. That's a huge one. Culture and upbringing can do it for sure. And then the last comment was because it's something that people learn. Just notice what happens in there as you went through each one of those, what happened inside of you when you kind of had to challenge yourself and realize maybe there's a lot of reasons why people behave poorly, and maybe it's not as simple as this is a bad person or this is a good person. And that's the whole point here. With these cognitive biases, you'll never ever get out in front of it. By definition, cognitive biases, your brain is slanted to go this way. And the way that we deal with them is we challenge them. So those 3 suggestions I made, suspending judgment, catch yourself in the stories and check your stories out with others, and then challenge yourself to think of other reasons why people might be behaving this way. Those are all ways that we catch the cognitive bias on the back end. Those are all ways that we soften that bias and move into something that may be more 3-dimensional and more connected with reality than a 1-dimensional explanation of why my partner gives me what they give me. So that is motive attribution asymmetry.
Thank you. We got to come up with a better title for that. It sounds so complicated, and it's like really straightforward.
You're bad, I'm good is what we'll call that.
Yeah.
That cognitive bias.
Yeah, one of the things I found interesting about what everybody put in the chat feature, at least because I put a couple things in the chat feature, was I typed in the motivations that I have when I behave badly.
Oh yeah.
And I know that those are my go-tos if I'm working with somebody with their bad behavior. I assume they're behaving badly for all the same reasons I do. And that's cognitive, that's motive attribution asymmetry. I mean, I'm probably not right.
Yeah, and I would also say a lot of people's first glance at why they do what they do actually isn't very fair. When I talk to people about their poor behavior, a lot of times their first response is, I'm just broken, I'm messed up, I'm just a bad person. So when we ascribe that to other people, again, we're falling with compassion has to be at the heart of how we see other people. That will decrease our error rate at the very least.
Yeah. And beyond learned beliefs, subconscious beliefs, socialization, and that kind of stuff, it's mostly about fear that you will not like me, or that you will not or that I'm not good enough. I mean, for me, that's what almost everything we come up with boils down to is, I think I'm not good enough, so I'm going to attribute to you that you're obviously not good enough. Otherwise, you wouldn't behave like a bad person.
Right.
Wow. I love what you said about with your remedies. One of them was stay curious. That's something that we talk about in our staff meetings all the time at Seeking Integrity is we need to stay curious, not just with our clients, but with each other. We need to find out why do you want to do that this way instead of the way we've been doing it? Because I know, like, I write our manuals, and if somebody wants to change the manual, I immediately feel like, oh well, I stink, and obviously you think I did this wrong, and I'm a bad, that's where I go, and I have to stay curious and say, oh well, tell me why you want to do this, and that, so anyway, this is going to be a part of a series.
I want to do more with cognitive biases. I'm just starting to dip my toes into that, and I think they're fascinating to look at how they play out on the micro level.
Yeah. No, I am fascinated. So we've got a couple questions, so let's get into these. So type your questions into the Q&A or the chat feature, but we go to Q&A first. Is it possible for a betrayed partner to fully heal with sex addiction, porn addiction, who refuses to live life in recovery? Doesn't want to live a life in a recovery program. He feels he is being told by his therapist that what he's doing weekly is enough. Talk therapy, not a CSAT. Occasionally listens to drop-in groups and podcasts. 3 years post discovery, no full therapeutic disclosure yet. There's a lot packed into that.
Yeah, simply put, the first part of the question, is it possible to fully heal? Yeah, it is. Because I think in situations like this, even if your spouse was in full recovery and doing everything they need to and growing, your ability to heal, I think, is rooted in your connection with reality, whatever that reality is.
I think, John, you're talking about the partner's ability to heal here.
Yes. Yep. And the difficulty with being rooted in reality is a lot of times the reality is not what we planned for. It's not what we wanted, and it's not what feels good to us. The reason why I think full healing happens only when we're rooted in reality, because when we're in reality, we can be 100% responsive to our needs, which for me is that's the gold standard in mental health. Is I know what my needs are, and I'm flexible and capable enough to respond to my needs, not to hold a rigid path in my life. So your ability to get rooted in reality is essentially independent from your spouse's status in recovery. That's not me saying that it's easier. I think it's far easier to get rooted in reality with a spouse who's also committed to the same, and together you're working to, essentially hold each other up, support each other as you walk through difficult realities. That's the simple answer to that one. I think it's really, really hard when it feels like in the relationship we're combating realities. If he has a therapist that he feels like is telling him, you're doing enough, you're just fine. In order for an addict, I think, to really fully get in recovery, they have to start turning and facing their relationship as it is. And that means facing a lot of wreckage and a lot of shame. So, for a lot of guys that I work with, if they had their preference, not that they want their spouse to continue to hurt, but if they had it their way, they wouldn't do a full therapeutic disclosure, because that's facing a lot of shame. That's really, really, overwhelming to get to that point. And the guys that get to that point, instead of turning to, a voice that's going to cheerlead or tell them they're doing just fine, they turn to voices about that will tell them the truth. And one of those voices is the voice of their spouse, when they say, you may be doing what you need for you, but you're not doing what I need from you. And that's part of the deal here. When we're married like this, when we're connected like this, I rely on you and you rely on me. I guess my take on what spouses can expect in relationships, is not out of bounds for you to expect that in order to have a healthy, supportive relationship, that you look out for each other. That's what a secure, functioning relationship is. And when it's working one way, I think you have more of an uphill battle to get to full healing, but it certainly can be done independent of your addicted spouse's participation in that.
So let's look at the flip side of that, John. So I'm the addict and I'm going to therapy once a week, not with the CSAT. I listen to a drop-in group and the occasional podcast. What are my odds of actually?
See, that to me, as light as that program sounds, it actually sounds like a very rigid program to me, because it's not inclusive of all the needs that might be there. It's not responsive. If the only things that I'm doing for myself to be in recovery are to go and talk to someone just kind of in general, someone who's maybe not going to push me or know what to look for to push me on. If it's listening to a drop-in group rather than participating, and listening to podcasts, none of those things are actually a two-way relationship, which I think is, that's the foundation of healthy recovery for anyone in addiction recovery. It's not just showing up to meetings is an important step, but we're really looking at building relationships and getting that dialogue to go two ways. So, I look at that and I would not say that's adequate for fully healing for a person who's struggling with addiction, because it's missing the most essential parts of coming out of sex and pornography addiction, which is the intimacy disorder, that two-way being challenged to feel in a relationship, being challenged to look at who you are and how you show up and interact with live people instead of keeping those interactions buffered.
Yeah, the research into addiction recovery outcomes finds that the best outcomes always are a combination of addiction-focused, individual and group therapy, which is very interactive, plus either 12-step meetings or active participation in other forms of support, such as a drop-in group. So it's this combination with a lot of interactivity with other recovering addicts. And in this case, the addiction-focused therapy, really for a sex addict, porn addict, I highly recommend that it be with the CSAT, because those are the people who are trained to deal with this very specific set of behaviors. And even somebody who knows alcoholism, their version of sobriety is complete abstinence. That's not how we do it with sex addiction.
Yeah.
It's eliminating the problem behaviors and developing healthy behaviors with your partner, if you're things like that. It's a specific skill set that a therapist should have. And the thing that really bothers me here is we're 3 years into recovery, and there's not been a full therapeutic disclosure. And I think that goes to the fact that we're not working with the CSAT. The CSAT would push for therapeutic disclosure.
Yep.
So that's my little rant.
Yeah. Amen to that. That's part of that reality is, this is what we're looking at after 3 years. There may not be a temperature gauge in this guy that says this actually isn't working. This isn't comfortable.
Yeah, he may be getting a little bit better, but you're, as Jon said, are you getting what you need from him? And you're not, or you wouldn't have asked this question.
There's lots of things that I know kind of out of the gate my addicted clients are going to need in their recovery. As far as the things that make their relationship better, I never know the answer to that. I need to talk with their spouse, and I need to, get a feel for their relationship to know what's needed there. And that's where I see a lot of spouses focused, and they should be, is your life can get better. That's great. But I'm not just signed up for you to have a great life and for me to kind of get what I need. I really need a partner who pulls fully with me.
And deserve in a relationship. My husband is deeply dissociated when it comes to his addiction, his acting out behaviors, his therapy, listening to recovery resources, the impact of his years of addiction. He doesn't remember or keep 90% of what we talk about, what he talks about with his therapist, or what we talk about with our couples therapist. How can we work on a relational recovery if he doesn't retain anything?
Yeah, I'll point to the first thing that I'm seeing here is the word talk is used, four times? Or it's, you're talking about a really cognitive process. If someone's dissociated, that's a down and right brain thing, meaning we're really dealing with subcortical structures. Language is up and left. So if he's really dissociative, talking isn't, I think it's it's a little bit of an unrealistic expectation that he's going to track and retain what's being talked about. The kind of things that I see being helpful with dissociative folks is a therapist who individually and in couples work is really attuned to what's going on in the body and helping gently bring the person's attention back to what's happening in their body. Because dissociation is the disconnection between cognitive awareness and what's happening in our body. And for folks who dissociate, we have to build that bridge again. We have to give them an opportunity. We have to like really teach them and load them with skills that keep them actually in the room first. And consequently, in the work that I do with couples, that's actually a huge part of the couples work. And in the mode of couples therapy I do, there's a lot of serious conversations that we have, and let's get on the same page. But we only do that after we have a firm base of these two people can stay in their bodies with each other. They can regulate themselves and they can co-regulate each other in that. Dissociation adds an extra obstacle to that, because this is a person that sometimes at the slightest hint of distress or dissonance, they'll bug out. They're not in their body anymore. But that's where the focus starts. And it's I have to work a lot with couples to understand this. That's actually not a second best. That actually is what the whole couples work is about, is can we stay in our bodies together and can we respond to one another's physiological needs? So the good news here is if you're working with a couples therapist who understands that dissociation, you actually get to skip a lot of the talking stuff that we waste brain on and energy on, and you get to go straight to helping one another stay grounded and present. Individual therapy, I would say, should also probably focus on that if someone's dissociative.
There are some alternative therapies that can help with that. Like art therapy is much more experiential. Sometimes people who dissociate can retain that, when psychodrama and things like that, and journaling, all that stuff.
Yeah.
There are ways around it, but dissociation is above my pay grade. So I'm kind of.
With dissociation, sitting and talking usually isn't sufficient to make learning happen.
Yeah. I'm gonna pull this one out of the chat feature because it's a follow-up. I think this is from our first question. I thought he was seeing a CSAT, but last night he told me the therapist is not a CSAT, but is SASH certified, Society for the Advancement of Sexual Health certified, and a generalist. What is the difference? Is there a difference between CSATs, who are trained by ITAP, International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals, and general sex therapists trained by SASH?
Yeah, there are. I can't speak with a lot of authority to the SASH certification because I haven't looked into it. But what you're getting with a CSAT is someone who is trained to really focus in on the key pieces of sexual addiction. In fact, one of the criticisms of the CSAT community is we're too focused on sexual addiction and we don't have a broad enough base for sexual health. One of the criticisms of the sex therapy or more sexual health focus is when they deal with sex addiction issues, they're not clued in enough to the details of sex addiction. They're too broad. So that would probably, my guess would be that would be some of the difference, is there's more of a broad-based sexual health focus. When Scott was talking before about addiction specific or addiction focused treatment, we really do have to focus on problem areas as well as sexual health. We can't get to one without the other. And a generalist is going to be, they're going to be equipped to focus on sexual health in general, not necessarily navigating problem areas with addiction, compulsion, trauma, all of that. CSATs, that's what we spend a year training on, and then I even forget how many hours of supervision after that and ongoing education. It's all focused on that trauma, sexual health, specific problems with addiction, and where all those intersect.
Yeah, the example I use is if I'm a gay man and I'm struggling to accept that, I've got all sorts of societal stuff and familial stuff bouncing around in my head, and so I'm not able to find a relationship or find any satisfaction in my sex life. I need a SASH therapist. I need a sexologist, a sexual health therapist, because they can help me work through my thinking and the mental blocks that I have. Sex addiction is a completely different animal. It's a behavioral issue. It needs behavioral treatment. Both of these therapists have a place in the world, and ideally they'd be very, very familiar with each other's work, but some are, some aren't. Most CSATs are very well versed in the generalist sexual stuff in addition to the addiction. Most of the generalists are not very well versed in the addiction stuff. That's my experience.
Yeah.
There are exceptions.
I would say at the very least, if it's been 3 years and he's been in treatment and you don't feel like you're any closer to what you need,
yeah,
it might be time to say, can we switch this up?
Yeah.
See what a different configuration could do for us.
I love this next question. I'm assuming it comes from an addict, but it could easily come from a partner as well. How can I stop lying to my partner, even about things I haven't done?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why people lie. At the heart of it, especially lying about the little things, simply put, I would say become comfortable with disappointing people, and that will help you stop lying, even about the things that you haven't done. And by comfortable with disappointing people, I don't mean cavalier and hardened to it, but more accepting the fact that in relationships we don't always get it right, and that there are times we're going to disappoint our partner and need to repair. That kind of lying to me feels a lot like that. I guess I'll say perfectionism. It feels a lot like that. I'm supposed to get this right. Repair is not an option. Repair is always an option. And I think when repair is needed and not given, it leaves a big hole. Like people really feel that. So if you can come to terms with the fact that you are going to hurt and disappoint your partner, that's just part of signing up for an intimate relationship. You may be less motivated to lie. You may be less motivated to tell your partner what they want to hear, and more motivated to tell your partner the truth, and then to show up and support your partner with what they need after that.
But for, particularly with addicts, lying is a habit.
Yeah.
And it's a hard habit to break. One of the things I know some couples do is they set some boundaries around, if you lie to me about anything, not just important things, you have 24 hours to come clean about it. I won't be mad that you lied to me if you come clean within 24 hours, because I know you're working on this. I might be mad about what you were covering up, but I won't be mad about the fact that you initially lied, as long as you make it right within 24 hours. But we lie about, I lied about everything. You'd say, what did you have for lunch today? And I'd say, oh, I went to Pizza King. When I went to McDonald's for the 4th day in a row. Now, why would I lie about that? Who cares?
Right.
It's still junk food, but I would hear those lies come out of my mouth. I'd be, why did I just say that? So it was just a habit to lie. And it's a hard habit to break. Conscious effort, lots of it. Reality checks from fellow recovering addicts, from your partner, from anybody. If your partner thinks, was that a lie? Encourage your partner to say, was that a lie? And don't get mad when he or she says that.
Yeah, you need a lot of practice, especially just like with any kind of behavior, you're probably not going to say, all right, it ends from here forward and I'll never ever do it again. So you need a lot of, at least in the beginning, I will always go back and correct a lie. And that's, even if it's lying about where I ate lunch or what my favorite movie is, I'm going to be, in AA, they call it rigorous honesty. I like to call it ridiculous honesty. That's the level of granularity you need if you really want to change that habit. Is I won't let any mistruth stand without me correcting it.
Yeah, even early in my recovery, the first year or two, I would be sharing in a 12-step meeting, and I would stop and I would say, wait, that's not true. And I would back it up and tell the truth, because it was just so ingrained, and it would make me crazy.
Yeah.
To hear this stuff come out of my mouth. So
yeah.
I feel your pain.
Yeah.
How to apply the cognitive bias as a betrayed partner while trying to understand the addiction at the same time? ? I don't judge my sex and love addict partner, and I know where the addiction is coming from, being able to see it as an intimacy problem. But even with all the education about this subject, I still struggle when the pain hits. Should I be focused more on healing the pain when it hits me, more than trying to understand the addiction in a cognitive way? So good question.
Yeah. I think your last set of questions there is right on. Focus more on the pain when it hits you than understanding it in a cognitive way. That would be my recommendation. This reminds me of, I was 15. My best friend and I, we decided that we wanted to learn kung fu. We were big Jackie Chan fans, and that's what we would do on weekends, is stay up late and watch Jackie Chan movies. So we found a dojo near us, and we took kung fu classes together, and that's where I got the nickname Johnny Whale Arms, because in my friend's opinion, and this is, I would say it's mostly true. No matter how much I was exposed to the skill and tried to learn it, in the end, when it came to sparring, I was just all over the place. And there was one time where we were sparring, and I actually kicked him in the face. Like, I kicked him in the jaw, and knocked him back. And he got up, and instead of being his normal, enraged, like, "You're just so careless, and like, you need to rein it in. Like, this is not what we're doing." He said, "That was awesome form." He said, "I think you might have broken my jaw, but that was great form." The At the end of the day, I don't think it changes the pain why it happens, and that's yours to figure out what to do with. I think that what I talked about today, it can provide some context so there's not unnecessary pain heaped on top of it. But at the end of the day, betrayal is betrayal, and it feels the way that it feels to you. And that's your task in becoming healthy, and your task in healing completely is, regardless of the reason, when you hurt, attend to the hurt. When you're tired, sleep. When you're hungry, eat. Like, it's no different. So yeah, I would say with that, don't try to don't think that looking at this will reduce the fundamental pain. My only reason in talking about cognitive biases and things like this is to reduce additional pain that comes after that maybe doesn't have to. But at the end of the day, betrayal will always hurt.
Yeah, I mean, pain first, understanding, thinking, and motivations and things in a calmer moment.
Yeah.
It's equally important, but not at the same time.
Yeah.
This topic you brought up, I've had understanding and compassion for everybody my whole life, always looking to defend their behaviors, even abusive parents and siblings, partner. And sadly, I never did that for myself. I took all the blame, and I was taught at an early age that I was a burden, and I learned to be pleasing and kind and sweet. Unfortunately, this brought me a lot of hardships in life. Now I am learning to be selfish and have understanding and compassion for the self first, and put myself number one. We'll parse that word selfish later. But thoughts, John? Johnny Whale Arms, do you have thoughts?
I actually love diving into the word selfish and the nuances of that. When that's a label we put on ourselves, it normally comes from a family or a culture that sees individuality as a threat, and your job is to be a team player. I actually really encourage my clients to get self-centered, meaning you center in the self first before you do anything else. So from that far in the statement here, if that's your history, to overlook and just be there to support others, becoming more self-centered, and the ability to stop at yourself first before you consider others, I think that's a good path there.
Yeah, I agree. I was taught early in recovery, I have to care for myself first. If I don't care for myself, I'm no good to anybody else. It's like I'm on the plane, and the door pops off, and the oxygen mask falls down, and I put mine on, and then I put my kids on. That's what they tell you to do. And that life is like that. It's not selfish. I just need to be in a good headspace before I can be of service and helpful to others, and to be the best team player I can be, which is a good thing. I need to be healthy and caring for myself. And that's not selfish. I love your version of self-centered, centering yourself first.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this brings us, I mean, this is we talk about codependence and prodependence a lot. I mean, this blaming and shaming, you're not good enough, you're a burden. That creates this codependent mindset where, I don't get to care for myself. And prodependence, which is what we profess here, means take care of yourself, and don't stop loving the other people and caring for the other people, but make sure you take care of yourself, because you're not really doing them any good if you're a mess. So anyway.
Yeah.
Can you help me explain? I am recovering from an abusive relationship. I still have his voice pops in my head, things he said, even from years ago, bad things he said, puts me down, etc. Is this a form of processing in my brain? Keeps popping into my brain and making me upset. So things that happened years ago are coming up, and probably feel like they're happening in the moment.
It is a form of processing in your brain, but know that your brain is not always equipped to autopilot complete processing. It may be processing in that it alerts you to the potential, this is out there, this threat is out there, this feeling is out there about you. One of the, I think, most helpful things that people can do when things like that pop up again and again is to get grounded and centered in the whole context of things. So I'm of the opinion, and I talk with clients about this all the time, that nobody is all gold and nobody's all crap. If you see yourself in either one of those lights, on either one of those extremes, you need to do some work on the other side. That's not the same, like to come to terms with the fact that you have some crap in you is not the same as tearing yourself down. It's being honest and forthright about your shortcomings and what doesn't work. So abusiveness is and verbal abuse like that is not an accurate view of you. It's a projection from inside of a person. Their fears, frustrations, all of that, it has nothing to do with you. But the way to complete that processing, because your brain will come up with that stuff independently, like you said, his voice is still in my head. That happens. I think it's really important to challenge yourself and to get some fair witnesses around you that can remember the rest of the story. So this comes up. This is where your brain processing by itself, it'll bring you to the problem, but it won't naturally bring you to the solution. You're going to have to push it there. So when these words come up in my head, I feel really burdened. You might have to spend some time on some affirmations. You might have to spend some time looking at your strengths. You might have to spend some time just breathing and reminding yourself that was in the past. What he told me about me isn't true. Do some work there to help your brain balance the story. But that things coming up years after the fact, I think that's really normal. The brain holds on to negativity because negativity hurts us. Positivity is not the thing that we're looking out for. We have a negative bias in our brain, and you overcome it with kind of training some of the positivity. Gratitude can be another really good thing to help balance the narrative here. Get your brain a little more seeing the whole picture.
Sorry, I missed some of your response. I was looking at the next question and trying to find some info. But did you talk a little bit about post-traumatic stress disorder? I don't want to get it off track, but
No, not in those terms, but I would say from what I did talk about, that is the symptomology of PTSD, is what happened then with a huge emotional charge. It comes and hits me out of nowhere now. In situations where there's flashbacks or resonance with the abuse later on, what that is your body staying sharp enough to protect you the next time it could happen. And that's what working with PTSD is getting the body to fully orient to what the situation is now, not what it could be or not what it was. And that's where, like, some of this, like I talked about, affirmations and balancing things out, that's getting the body to orient to a safe here and now if you have one.
yeah, and I mean, I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I've done a lot of work on it, but still, once in a while, something that will happen in the present. Usually, not anything abusive or mean or or anything, but it will push the button that lights up that pathway from 40 years ago. And it's like I'm in the moment 40 years ago, but and I have to do this processing in my head of, okay, what I'm feeling is not related to what's happening right now. So, and just that understanding will help, but I still have to, it's no fun when stuff that you think is dead and buried pops up and starts walking around like a little zombie in your head. It's no fun at all. But you can work on it and do the reality checks. The big thing is just a reality check. Where are my feet? Where are my hands? Where are my eyes? What's happening right now? Is what I'm feeling linked to this or something else? And I kind of have to go that route with myself, which I think is a lot of what you just covered. So I was looking up information on LifeStar. Can you share what you know about the LifeStar sex porn addiction program? I've not been able to find much on it. My husband's therapist initially told us he was experienced skilled with porn and sex addiction through this program, but he seems very lacking in helping my husband with anything beyond sobriety. No partner sensitivity at all, no proper disclosure skills. I don't know that much about LifeStar, so I looked it up, and there isn't much available. But John, you may know.
LifeStar is actually huge in the area where I practice, and a lot of my clients come to me after a bout of LifeStar. I think your perception there is right on. There's some really solid tools for getting sober, but I hear a lot of spouses and a lot of the addicts that I work with the same criticism is beyond sobriety. I don't really know, and I don't really get it from this. In general, what I'll say here is there's not a lot of consumer education that we do for people who are seeking therapy. With buying a car, there's a lot of good recommendations out there. Take it to an independent mechanic, see if it's Carfax or whatever the new thing is, certified. But when it comes to consuming therapy, I think a lot of people are under the impression that all therapy is created equal and, all therapists are equally equipped to deal with things. A few years ago, I was having a procedure at my doctor's office, and it was a specialized procedure, so it wasn't my regular doctor. And as part of his informed consent, put you at ease, I'm there in the office. He's, getting ready to cut into me. And he says, I started doing these procedures because I was just kind of interested in them early in my career. And at that point, I almost jumped off the table and I said, well, if your qualification is your interest and you've kind of watched some other doctors do this, no thanks, not today. And he said, and from that point, he said, over the 20 years I've been doing this, I've continued to get continuing education on this and to make sure that my technique is adequate and up to date with research. And even pointed to the wall, here are the certificates showing this continuing education I've got. And I was like, all right, you can cut into me. This is going to be fine. A lot of therapists are exposed to a lot of different things. I would just say, one thing to know when you're shopping for a therapist, training is not the same thing as certification. Training may be, I was at a conference and somebody spoke on this. Usually at conferences, speakers speak for 60 to 120 minutes. It's usually a very high level presentation, and there's no practical side to it. In other words, there's no, why don't you practice the skill and you'll get critiqued and you'll get helped and supervision with that. Someone who certifies, not only have they undertaken or likely undertaken a hefty amount of education, they've probably also done supervision with an expert in the field. And there are competencies that are passed off in that. So when you're shopping for a therapist, you might want to ask beyond, have you been through this and learned a lot? Or, what have you done to educate yourself? Have you received supervision on this? Has it been formalized supervision? Did this entail any kind of certification, and who was that certification through? Because there's, even in programs that are run by CSATs, not every therapist on staff is a CSAT. And there can be a difference in what you get there, being around it a lot versus really diving in and becoming expert in it are two different things. Expertise is not gained from observing on the edges. It's really it's a specific intentional process. So again, your Read on the LifeStar program, I've heard a lot along those lines. My guys that come out of LifeStar, they have some pretty good sobriety skills, but it might be time to look with a little more of a discerning eye on what you need next in therapy and who can provide that.
Yeah, particularly if you want a disclosure. Nothing is worse for a relationship health than an improperly done disclosure. That's a nightmare. If you want a disclosure, you need somebody who's trained and experienced in disclosures, and that's going to be a CSAT, maybe with an LMFT on board.
Yep.
So we are out of time, everybody. Thank you, Jon. It's wonderful to see you on this 43rd day of December of 2020. And we'll be back in 2 weeks. We hope you all will join us. Thank you again, and really cool topic today, Jon. I hope we'll consider or continue the series. Great. We'll see you on a couple weeks. Anything you want to say to take us out?
Thanks everybody for the participation and the questions. I'll look forward to seeing you guys in 2 weeks. Bye.